There's probably going to be some bad language in this, so you might not want to let the kids watch. What's going on, you fucking mad dogs? Wino's back with another review of The Ultimate Fighter, Season 29, this time, Episode 5. And hey, look, another episode where you can pretty much fast forward through most of it straight to the fight. But the fight was good. The fight was good. So, before we get to that, quickly run through the episode. Started off, looked like we might get a bit of heat in the episode, just like we left off last week with a bit of jawing between the coaches, bit of an argument there. Mitch Raposo gets in the van, Raposo from Volkanovski's team, and he seemed pretty heated about the whole thing. He seemed like he was all worked up. And then they get to the house. He had a problem with Andre piping up during the little back and forth between Volkanovski and Ortega, because he's like, just let them talk their shit. Like, you didn't have to open your mouth. But look, both guys had a bit of a point here. Andre's just like, hey man, I was saying to his face what I thought rather than saying behind his back. And Raposo was like, it's not our spot to talk there. Like, if the coaches are going at each other, let them go at each other. Like, we're not the ones who are going to fight each other. We're not the ones on the same level, fight-wise, experience-wise. So, you know, both guys had a point. Andre, it kind of finished with him, and he had a good point there too. And he was pretty cool about it. He was like, look, I don't not like the kid. He can probably learn how to express his opinion better without coming across so aggressive. And you know what? Yeah, that seemed pretty fair. But I also know where Raposo's coming from, because, like, if you're frustrated, like, he's already lost and he'd never lost before. The team's 0-4. So having the opponent's coach who you look up to do something that you feel like is talking shit to you, I can see that frustrating you, and you're getting a bit worked up about it, and then you put all that on the guy you think you can, which is another competitor who piped up as well. So, look, neither guy was too fucked up in it, but neither guy was necessarily in the right or wrong, and not much came out of it. Then Ortega shows up at the house, and this is what we got in the stinger to last week. But you know what? The stinger, not the stinger to last week, the stinger at the end last week for this week. And you know what? They fucking baited and switched us. They baited and switched us. Because in that stinger, it made it look like Ortega was going to show up and continue the argument and keep rubbing it in Volk's team's face that they were 0-4. But that's not what he did so much. He showed up. He was talking some shit with Ryder to play foosball with him, but Ryder teamed up with Trey Shan. So it was like a Volk guy and a Ortega guy both playing against Ortega. And you know, Ortega said himself, like, he's competitive and he's good at foosball apparently. And he was talking shit while playing foosball. And he didn't seem to get too crazy out of line or anything. Like, the stinger they showed at the end of last week made it look like he was going to show up in the house and just start rubbing it in Volkanovski's team face that they've all lost so far and they've got nothing going on, and which would be a bit of a cunny thing to do. But that's not what happened. He just showed up, played some foosball, talked a bit of shit, which I can understand. The one line he did say was like, oh, we're 4-0 in the competition, and I just went 4-0 up in foosball. And it's like, ooh, that could be a bit of a rub it in the face. But still, it's like, you know, you're in the heat of competition. And Raposo thought he was being a bit childish and stuff, but overall, it was pretty fair. The rest of the episode up until the fight was pretty standard stuff. We got a little bit of training footage, like usual. like I'd rather see him, working techniques and rolling and stuff like that rather than shadow boxing. That's the kind of training I want to see, them actually kind of working shit out. But we got a little bit of that, and mostly, as always, we got the stories of both guys. Not much to say about either one. They look like good dudes. One's got a kid on the way. They both have families. Hey, they're humans. Who figured? So anyway, we get to the fight. And the fight was great. The fight was pretty good. Not great as in like, knockdown, drag out, back and forth. Both guys in it the whole time. Like, Battle had it covered pretty much the whole time. But it was still fun to watch. With Battle's technique and his game plan mixed with Cameron's just toughness and willingness to take a shot, it ended up being a fun fight. And straight from the get-go, the game plan was working for Battle. He worked his range well. Most of the first round was mostly about his kicks, a lot of leg kicks, but also body kicks. Some deep kicks straight up the middle to keep that distance. He'd work his jab a bit. He'd also work his right hand, some check right hooks instead of check left hooks on the way out and whatnot. And that's the biggest thing. He was working his angles really well, because Cameron did have that constant forward pressure, and there were numerous times where he started backing Brian up towards the cage, but Brian would just find an exit out of it and would usually land something on the exit and just reset, and here we go again. On the few times Cameron did cut him off somewhat and go for the takedown, it was almost like a bit of a dive-in. I mean, almost always like a bit of a dive-in takedown, like an attempted double leg. Didn't like fully cut off the cage and get in on a clinch. But Brian always was able to defend that initial takedown, bring it up into the clinch, and then once it was like a body-to-body clinch, Brian was working his knees like an absolute demon. Like, some of those knees to the body were absolutely crazy. There was a little point in the first round where Brian landed a knee to the head and a punch, and then broke and moved back, and Cameron tried to do the Mark Hunt versus Ray Sefo, just walk forward with his hands down and let Brian punch him a few times, and he did, and he punched him numerous times, and then he finished it with a fucking flush head kick. But, props to Cameron. He just ate that and kept walking through it. But really, there was no danger coming from Cameron in that round. And second round, look, it was pretty much the same story. Brian landed a big head kick that put Cameron into the walk forward with your hands down move again, instead of catching it on the end of it. Brian was still just working from the outside. His takedown defense was fantastic. As soon as they got in clinches, he was working those knees, landed at least one. There were definitely more than one to the head, but there was one in particular that he landed a big one to the head, and you saw Cameron just go, oh, oof. Yeah, that one hurt. But, yeah, Brian kept it up, did pretty much everything that I said he did in the first round, in the second round, and, yeah, clearly won the fight. Cameron jumped in at the end of the first round, jumped in on like a Hail Mary leg lock attempt. Never really had that going, and he tried to do the same thing towards the end of the second round, but Brian kind of stacked it this time and just ended up on top, fucking dropping a bit of ground and pound. And yeah, it was just a case of one guy basically getting outclassed, but being tough enough to still make it entertaining for everyone. So next week, we got another fight, of course. That's why you're watching the show. And from the stinger at the end of this episode, it looks like the pranks are going to start. Or at least we'll see prank next week from Team Ortega, which could be a bit of fun. We need something to spice up the before the fight filling. But so far, the fights have been good in the season. The rest of the show has been pretty lackluster. There's been little sprinklings of interestingness. So let's hope the fights keep being entertaining, which is what's the most important thing. And let's hope we get a little more drama, get a little more tetchiness, because they set us up for drama last week and they kind of pulled the rug out from underneath us by there not being a huge amount. So yeah, guess that's it. Unlike most weeks, we don't have a card to look forward to this Sunday, so I'm going to be pretty spewing. But I'll catch you all next week for the next review of The Ultimate Fighter.